going away from pain, shying away from pain is not something you want to do as an entrepreneur. Time ticks the same for everybody, right? Every day. So it's really, you got to really seriously think about like what's going to work for you and what's your current situation.
How's that sound? Is that better?
Yeah, I guess I just don't like my own voice.
Nobody
okay.
does. Nobody does.
Okay.
Okay. And we're recording already, so.
Okay.
Yep. So, Alex, thanks for having me over.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
And tell me about yourself, what you do.
Sure. So I do 3D printing, and I started this, in Japan about 8 years ago. I basically, my goal is that I want to build a new type of supply chain, and the reason 3D printing comes into play there is because, for me, 3D printing is sort of fundamentally a new way to look at the manufacturing problem. A lot of the, my main thesis is like a lot of um, the way we manufactured stuff hasn't really changed for the last few hundred years, or maybe I can rather say like the structure of society has been geared around this way of manufacturing that we had on basically machines, right? So since we got these machines, we've been having like figuring out how do you make machines more efficient, and you can kind of do that in one of two ways, which is you make the machines better, and so that's the tech aspect, I guess, and then but the other way, which has really dominated as well, and we've been playing a kind of a shell game in manufacturing, which is you find cheaper labor to run the machines, and um, so you sort of build these processes with some some smart guys that have figured it out, and then you figure out, okay, well, now where's the cheapest labor that we can do this process at? And that's been sort of the shell game of manufacturing, and we've sort of geared the world economy towards that. Like um I think like for example, like nobody thinks about piracy anymore, like we have like but you wouldn't want to like be shipping parts around the world a few times if piracy was a problem, if there was no like the seaways weren't totally clear, right? Because then insurance companies and stuff, that would just, the costs would be massive, right? So
Sorry,
yeah.
let me interrupt. When you say piracy, do you mean like people stopping ships and stealing the cargo, or do you mean software piracy? Or
No, I mean the original piracy, right?
Okay.
Like the Blackbeard piracy, right? And yeah, and
so that still happens.
yeah, but not a lot, right? I mean, like there are some areas, and interestingly enough, if you're like a shipping company, I'm pretty sure the insurance companies are like, hey, if we catch you going in here, you're not allowed, right? I mean, that's I'm pretty, or your rates go up or something like. But I mean, I would say relatively speaking, that piracy is like nothing compared to a few hundred years ago or something like that. And I think that we've geared so much of the economy around. I guess I'm not like I'm saying like piracy is the main reason. But I think that's just one of those factors that people don't quite appreciate, that goes into how we build and structure the whole economy of things, and like how we make things and how we get those to people. And so in my mind, it's like 3D printing and these really advanced manufacturing processes, and as you, especially more autonomously, I think you're going to end up locating those processes near the end user. So like the closer you are, like it's not going to be any it's not going to be a question anymore of like, can we make this the cheapest over here? It's going to be like, well, actually, we want to build the factory. Where's our biggest client base, or where's our most important client base? We're going to build a factory there, because at some point the transaction costs become more when you're highly autonomous, when your manufacturing is really good and you put a lot of technology into it. At some point, the transaction costs are actually going to be bigger than the labor cost.
Okay,
or at least the difference in the labor cost.
Okay, so that makes sense. And we've talked before offline about your whole journey into 3D printing. Tell me how you got into 3D printing.
Yeah, I mean, I think my very first exposure was like I read a news article or something. I saw some picture, and it was like they had like a 2D printer, and there was like a gun coming out of it. I think they like they took a like a photo, or I don't know how they made that, but somebody just slapped a gun in there, and you're like, oh, wait a second, And then the article was like, I guess that this was like pre-clickbait times, so I'm not sure what that was, sort of traditional clickbait, but
Mm.
it was something like 3D printing and guns, and then like we should all be scared, or I'm not sure, I can't remember. I just remember the picture really because it was
Okay.
so outlandish. But basically, I saw that in like the early like 2007 to something like that, 2008. I don't know, somewhere around then, and then I got like, whoa, really? You can make guns with a printer? Like that was okay. So I ended up researching that a little bit, and then of course I realized, oh well, it's not quite like that.
Yeah.
And um, surprise, right? That the media would be wrong, but it happens
Big
occasionally.
surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, from time to time, right? And so yeah, so I got that kind of first taste. And then when I was in China, and I was looking at all these factories in China, I was kind of going around to really the places that make stuff. I started to get a sense that like everything is not quite as efficient. Like nowadays people talk about, and companies really, they talk about like efficiency and how efficient the supply chain is, and you have like just in time production, and you have like these global.
Agile design and
Right,
lean
right.
manufacturing, things like that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I don't even know all the words,
Mhm.
honestly, but I know there's like a lot of these words, but basically they're just saying like, okay, well, how can we cost cut and make myself look like I'm doing a good job at the company?
Mm.
And I started to get a sense that like, manufacturing is not really, or that pathway is not really to the benefit of anyone, except those guys that are actually making it in those shops, the factory like owner there, and then generally it's only to his benefit because he's like taking that process and design and then building his own products on top of that, or going to his brother and building that, like setting up a copy shop or copy manufacturing operation, in one factory down the street, which yeah, it's happens in, believe it or not.
Mm.
And so I thought like something is really not right about that whole thing. And there was such a disconnect with people, and then that are going to consume these goods, and then with the people that are making it. So there's also a huge, it's hard to quantify this, but there's a huge social disconnect, on like, I could say maybe trust or empathy, or something between these two groups of people, the people making stuff and the people using it. And I thought that that's not really, economists don't really talk like that, in terms of like, they often don't put those into their calculation because it's really hard to quantify. It's really hard to represent that as a simple thing. But I actually suspect that plays a very large role in the economy, um, and that, so then from that sense, I wanted to sort of bring those two groups of people closer together, to make them more accountable to one another. And I thought through that process that actually we would all get better, basically, that everything would improve. So instead of, having one giant car factory in another country, you would actually have, like five regional car factories, or more strategically located around your consumers, and that the effect of that is really something that is like very hard to put on a piece of paper and say like, oh, it's going to be X
Mm.
dollar value, or it's going to be, but certainly everybody at the same time would probably agree that it's a very positive thing. And so I thought, I wanted to get into a field, an area where I could kind of build that future, and 3D printing is a little bit like that,
Mhm.
because it's a really, sort of, let's say it's advanced manufacturing technology and process. So why not try to build these more localized factories that are more accountable to the local users, and there's more tie-in with the local thing. That's why like we changed like our tagline to say like "Made Here,"
Ah,
because I think our goal is to build a supply chain where everything is made here.
Okay. So instead of like, when I was a kid, when you got a Sony, it
Yeah.
would say made in Japan. Now it
Yeah.
says made in China.
No, now it says no. Now we try to trick consumers and say like designed in California.
Yeah.
And then,
that always drives me crazy.
right, and it's like, yeah, maybe, but it's a little bit, yeah, it's kind of missing the point. It's missing the point, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and if I could make an analogy and tell me if this is a bad analogy, but like I remember as a kid, and I was born in 1969, so I'm probably a couple years older than you, or maybe a decade or two. But
okay.
but
who's counting?
No, who's counting?
Age is just
a number,
yeah,
right? Or a mentality.
But
right?
I'm much younger and handsome. Yeah, so that's
actually much more handsome.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you that. And I'll give you the obvious.
Okay.
But I remember as a kid, like going to the local bakery or having a machine at home where, or my mom would bake a cake or bake a something. And I also remember going to supermarkets when supermarkets and big supermarkets became a thing, and going and buying white bread.
Yeah.
Which is basically just like a slice of sugar, right?
Right.
But I remember the difference in quality, and I remember going to see the baker.
Yeah.
And they had like this local accountability, right? And
yeah,
wherever you go around the world, I've been to like Denmark and Korea, and not a lot of countries, but when you go to Denmark, everybody has their favorite bakery, and they go in and they say, "Oh, this is Mr. Nelson, and he bakes the bread here, and this is the best bread in the world."
Right.
But everybody says that, right?
Well,
about their local bakery,
and every Italian knows that their grandmother operates the best restaurant, right? And so
the best pasta sauce in the world, right? So that's kind of like where my mind went to when you were talking about made here.
Well, so do you know what was the real impetus for me on that? Like what was really like the moment I realized that was when I was crossing the border from Hong Kong to Shenzhen, China, and I see all these people bringing in milk, baby milk, yeah. And I thought, oh my goodness, like I asked my friend, like, hey, what is that? Like, why,
what's going on?
Yeah, right. Like, normally
why the milk?
Why the milk, right? Why the baby formula?
Why not electronics or something, or
right. And but I learned, why that was, right? And then it was basically because there, consumers in China were afraid of that, of the baby milk poisoning their kids or killing them at the time, right? I mean, it was a big story.
Wow.
I think there was.
I remember
there was some coverage around all that stuff, and I think to China's credit, probably some heads rolled on that one. But I think that the what I realized at that time, sort of the cold, logical part of me realized, like, the reason that some executives knew that was the case. They knew that they're going to save a few yen, a few renminbi on that by doing that, but that it might not exactly be safe. But here's the thing: it's that you realize it's like those same executives, they would be the ones crossing the border and bringing in baby milk. Because if you were an executive, there's no way you're going to give your own kids or your family, right? Let's say you're saying, hey, I'm producing it in this region, and it's for these guys. I'm not going to feed it to my sister or my cousin or whoever to save a few cents, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there is that accountability, and it's so hard to calculate exactly the impact of that in the economy. Like you said, like economists do a very poor job of that. It's like, what is that taste of the bread? They're saying, no, there's 8 slices of bread here, and there's 8 slices of bread that you got at the bakery, but now you're getting them 15% cheaper. Therefore, we are better by 15% or something like this. But no, it's like that bread is not the same.
It's on a spreadsheet, it makes sense, but when you taste it, it's like
right.
It's a huge difference, yeah.
Right, and I mean, and this is why we have to be very careful about attempting to rule the world or govern society through these kind of very simple numerical abstractions, and which economists are sort of the most guilty party at.
See, people blame lawyers. I blame accountants.
Well, I mean, we were talking about humans, right?
Yeah. And there's an argument to be made, like, are lawyers human?
Right. Or do they have a soul or something like this? I think the verdict is out. No, I think, yeah, right. I don't know who is the worst group of professionals.
I don't know, but humans are fallible, and we could spend hours on that. But
Well, I think
we screw up.
exactly,
Yeah.
and I think every profession can be evil in their own special way, and economists just happen to do it at a bigger scale, I think.
And it affects more people's lives.
Sure,
Right?
sure, right. Like, what's
Okay.
the Keynes quote about the whole like they're just they find themselves to slaves to some defunct economist. You you guys have to Google what the full thing, but something like that. And
I need a researcher. Once the podcast gets bigger, we'll have another person sitting here.
Well, just let's do
Googling
this.
stuff,
Let's just do this in post. Just edit my voice, make it sound like I knew the whole quote. Okay.
No worries. This is free form, So tell me about your journey as an entrepreneur. This is probably not your first company. I'm just guessing.
Yeah. So I started I started like I don't know when it was that I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur, or if I even knew what that meant. Um I think it was like I was pretty young though, like 16, 17, something in that time period and I just thought that the idea of doing one thing, like working a job like 9 to 5, something like that for the rest of my life was like, I just like somehow thought that I can't do that. Like I somehow the idea of not being able to explore like different possibilities really upset me. Or really not upset, but like really was tough for me a tough pill to swallow. And I didn't, right. So I think my first like, thing was I tried to sell wine in, from Italy to America, but I wasn't so successful with that. And I ended up drinking, half the inventory. And, so that was definitely failed venture, but I learned a lot, I mean, that was a minor scale and stuff. So it's okay. But I learned a lot about, the complexities of business, like what you really need. And then, since I did that, since I was, geez, how old was I then? Like, 20, 19, 20, 21, something like that. And then, and then I kind of, like that lasted maybe like very short time, like a year or something like that. But then since that point in time, I guess I've kind of been on this journey of like, how do you make a business? What is a business? I think it's actually like worth trying to define what that means. Because I actually think most people get that wrong. What is entrepreneurship? I also think most people get that wrong. So those are really worthwhile things to sort of reflect upon. And since then I've been doing that. And then I started this company about 2016, or early 2016. So since then, I've been kind of just building it up and still learning. Like every day, I think I'm learning and trying to learn. And I think there's two parts to it, right? Like there's like the personal journey as an entrepreneur, if I can use that word. I don't really think I am one yet, but if I can say that, but and then I think there's also these like professional journey, where like the skills journey. So part of it is you've got to mature psychologically to some point to take on all this like stress and confrontation with different things. You've got to have a lot of ability to reflect internally, but you've got to also be a confident leader. And there's like a lot of these like these personal things, and then but there's a lot of then the basic business operation skills that go into it. You've got to really understand, like, how do you manage cash flow? How do you rally a team? Like, how do you build a management team? How do you like and I think I'm still learning a lot of these things. I mean, there's so much to learn, right? When it comes to that but it's fun. I mean, I enjoy that kind of learning. So I guess for that reason, I'm very happy to be in whatever I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's your, let's see, do you have a management style, or is that something you studied or something you're evolving in, or?
I'm not a good one. So I don't know if I can. I don't think I have a style.
Okay.
No, I don't think I have a style. I actually don't I don't really, I mean, this is going to sound like bad, like, but I don't really like look up to anyone, or I don't like, I mean, I don't like, oh, Steve Jobs said this and he did like this, right? And I thought like, and that's fine, but I think people kind of like, and no doubt they're very successful, or there's a lot of these really
Mm.
great guys, I'm sure, but um, I think sometimes time and positioning and your unique context. I mean, business is so highly contextualized that
Mm.
there's no way you just copy and paste lessons. Like, it's like you can read a book by Steve Jobs. It doesn't mean you're going to build the next Apple. And I think like, and people, and that's largely why MBAs are kind of worthless, right? I mean, for if you want to be an entrepreneur, because you're not going to learn in from a book about how to be a better entrepreneur. I think the analogy would be like would be around the like gym or something, where it's like I want to build muscle, and it's like you can study about from a book about the most optimal way to build muscle, but if you don't go to the gym and lift weights, you're not going to build any muscle.
That's my thing with this, this podcast and
Yeah.
YouTube and things like that is, there's somebody who says you just got to press record, right? And for me, podcasting is like, you just press record and start talking, and I have a list of questions, but like the conversation goes where it's going to go, right? But
Sure.
I that's my philosophy of doing stuff, and it's not just like, oh, just start. You got to kind of have a plan, but
Yeah, you need to have a vision, maybe. I don't
mhm.
know, even a plan, but yeah, you want to have some aim, something that you're shooting for. I totally think so.
And I
Yeah.
think, and sorry for interrupting,
No.
I think a lot of people, and we both live in Japan, and I think Japanese people like to be very prepared before they start something,
Oh, yeah. That's
and
a
they
fail,
want
yeah.
to know everything about it
Mhm.
before they start it. And so, well, I think kind of what I'm alluding to is that you don't know everything about what you're doing until you start doing it. Does that sound right? Or?
Yeah, I think that's, if I can, here's my take on it,
Mhm.
is it's a little bit like psychological, where I think Thomas Saz said something like, here's a quote. He said something like, a child becomes an adult when he realizes he has the right to be both right and the right to be wrong. Um, and I think that, and here's what I mean by that is, or what Harris, like how I take that is that a lot of people in that sense are still children, because they don't quite, like, a lot of middle-aged men in Japan are still somewhat infantile in their development, because they still think that they need permission to be wrong. But actually, that is all on you. You get to determine if you are right or wrong, and make those choices that make you both right and wrong. And entrepreneurship, you are certainly going to be responsible for making the wrong decision. I make the wrong decision a lot. Um, and to know that and to take that on is a sort of a psychological development that just a lot of the population doesn't have, and therefore are incapable of basically being entrepreneurs, because they can't accept that they can be allowed to make the wrong decision.
Uh,
Everything is like, the sensei is going to teach me the right way, and I'm going to follow what the sensei does. So my job is follow the sensei, and then in 10 years or whatever, I'm going to learn everything he has to teach me, and I'm going to be
mm,
confident to do that. But that is abdicating the right, or their power, or their agency,
mhm.
to allow to permit themselves to be wrong. They can't be wrong because they're following the sensei.
Uh,
So it's not, there's no even choice in the matter. There's no agency. They're just basically denying that part of their development, the psychological development. And I think for that reason, that the responsibility and leadership is such a huge issue in business in Japan, because of this dynamic. I mean, this is kind of the psychological side of it, but I think it's very much true from my observation.
You know, I had a position before where I was managing a small team, and they wanted the rules around their responsibilities very clearly defined,
Yeah.
and they would keep pushing the limits until we would have to define the limits. And every time we had to define a limit, it would become more restrictive.
Right.
But they kept pushing that.
Right.
And I was like, why do you keep asking for more limitations in that? But now you've just helped me understand that
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why there's a lot of like, so culturally too, if you want to do business in Japan, it's really more about risk like mitigation. I mean, this sounds somewhat cliche, but it's like so if you're like, hey, I'm going to we're going to branch out into Japan in our business, and we're going to do this and X, Y, and Z. Um, One of the things I think that will sort of strike people is like, um, you have to define all of the like negative cases in advance. Like, uh, you know, here's 100 scenarios that can go wrong. So define 100 scenarios that can go wrong and explain the response to them. Actually, there's like a 0.001% chance that any of those will happen, but that is what is required, because no one can take the responsibility for something going wrong, because no one has the right to be wrong.
Ah, wow. Working in software sales, I mean, you've really explained the customer mentality.
Okay.
We get, cloud software. I work in, SaaS,
Yeah.
and I get a lot of questions about, what about security breaches and things like
Right.
that.
Right.
And
Right.
and it's all about the worst case scenario.
Sure.
What if this happens? What if this happens? What if there's an earthquake? It's like, and it's surprising to me, but when I run this past another Japanese person, they're like, well, of course we want to know all those things.
Right. Right. Right.
It's more of a mentality.
Because yeah, again, because no one in that organization is permitted to be has the right to be wrong. So
And then you get somebody who's, this is their last position.
Yeah.
They're in their
and they
a
have the
couple
right
years
to
in
be wrong.
retirement. Yeah. Well, no. But what I was going to say is that I may be thinking of this differently. Is that this is their last job in the corporation, and they don't want to take any risk because they don't want their legacy to be the last thing I did was I bought a product that didn't work.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I've seen it both ways. I think it depends on their role, but I've actually seen some very aggressive guys that were like, "Hey, this is my last project. Let's just like shoot for the moon."
Oh,
And then so I have seen that, yeah. And then but the kind of phenomenon you're talking about, I think that it generally probably depends on what role you're in. CEOs in Japan, totally, they will never take any. They won't rock the boat because they're in the job. It's basically semi-retirement. They're in the job for 2 to 5 years or something like that, and then they're just expected to sort of not do anything crazy, like just
Yep.
everybody knows that the company's dying slowly, but nobody wants to
On
do anything
life
about
support.
it. So there's like, it's like, oh my goodness, like and again though, that actually comes, I think that's like a corporate governance issue. I think it's an ownership issue. Who owns the company? How is that structured? And I think that if you get, but again, it comes down to responsibility, to who holds that right, to sort of maturity of the people around. Because in theory, you have a company and you have a board of directors, and the board of directors, in theory, should be responsible for that. But what you find is that the board of directors in that company, they're actually not responsible either, because they're just proxies for someone else, and they're and it's like, whoa, where is responsibility? Where does that responsibility end? Where does that start and stop? And
it's pretty murky, actually.
yeah, quite. And I think that's a major issue in some of these companies. So there's a tendency to like, okay, put everything in stasis because no one can be wrong. So unless it's a sure thing, unless we know we're going to do this, but here's the thing about the world is that nothing is sure. The future is not known, and that especially when you say we want to get into something new, risk is sort of inherent with reward, right? Like there is a trade-off there that has to occur. You can never have both, at least not in a market economy. But so that's a very yeah. So that whole structure makes it very difficult to move things forward. And
Does that open up a space for foreign entrepreneurs then, or foreign business owners?
I've heard people say that. Like
Mhm.
I've heard people. I have one friend, also a foreign entrepreneur in Japan, doing really well. He told me like, yeah, feels like sometimes we can be the only ones that are successful. Him referring to foreigners can be the only ones that are successful because we can kind of break out of that system. Um, I think it's. I actually don't agree with that. I think it's much harder for a foreign entrepreneur. But I just think it's like you basically get guys that come to Japan, and you get really some of the best and some of the worst,
Mm,
and it's like you're getting the sort of extremes in that sense because if you come to Japan as a foreigner to start a company, you're already like pretty determined. Like
mhm.
there's not a lot of like slack in
Yeah.
that question. So those guys, they're not going to be the average guy anyways, and so I think that's probably why you see a disproportionate amount of success with foreign entrepreneurs in Japan
Okay.
is just inherently due to that. I think if you were a young Japanese guy and you were like listening to this podcast or you were like listening to something, and you have so many opportunities. Like the country, the economy is so hungry for entrepreneurship and leadership
Mhm.
that if you built that in within yourself, if you somehow found that, discovered that, then you have a very big opportunity because I think there's no shortage of people in Japan, in government, in large companies, and etc., that desperately want to support
Mhm.
the next generation, but they just don't have enough. There's just not enough of
Yeah.
it, supply of that. Yeah,
Mm. What about kind of switching gears here? What about
sure.
the importance of mentors?
Super important. I think mentorship is super important. I was like fortunate enough to have some mentors in business, and maybe even to this day, I still have some kind of mentorship. I think it's super important. There's there's a lot of like there's a lot of questions. There's like there's the like the personal stuff that you have to figure out, and it's like, hey, is it really okay to like take this much risk? Is it really? And those kind of questions really have to be answered by someone very close to you, someone that you can trust, someone, and I think that's where mentorship comes in. um yeah, I would say I would say that maybe my mentorship has changed a little bit from where I was sort of very overtly a mentee, to now. I think I just try to look at the everybody I talk to and like try
Mm.
to figure out what can I learn from them. And so there's guys in large companies in Japan that I really respect and look at as a sort of mentor. But they're not going to be a mentor as an entrepreneur, but they're going to be a mentor to help me learn about how do I navigate the corporate world, for
Mm.
example. And they can. So I think once you get some of the basics down, you can really start to look for mentorship in a lot of different areas in a lot of different ways. And
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily need to be super hierarchical. I think you can just really respect where people can contribute value, but you have to keep your eyes open. I mean, and
Mm.
your heart or mind or
Mm.
some part of you open too to kind of be willing to receive that. And I don't think everybody is, which is both good and bad thing. But yeah,
It seems like it takes a little bit of humility to say, like, I don't know everything, but somebody else might know something that I don't, that can be that can add value.
yeah, I think humility is a good attribute for an entrepreneur, at least for me, because I still make so many mistakes that I have to be somewhat humble because if I was too arrogant,
and and
yeah.
that's good to know too, because I mean, I think back to the big Coca-Cola thing where they made like a new Coca-Cola and it failed
Oh, okay.
miserably, and then recently CNN Plus, big surprise, they had a multi-million dollar failure with their subscription service.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But and I mean, they're still going. Coca-Cola is still going, and so they failed with a project, but it didn't bring the company down.
Yeah, and I'm also like, and with the CNN Plus thing and stuff, I'm a little bit like, I don't know what you don't know what's really going on behind the scenes and how all that like. I sometimes think that like some of these failures that seem very public are not actually really that big of failures, or they're not really failures at all. And some of these successes are actually failures. And
Mm,
they seem like successes, but they actually are big failures. And unless you're really close to the topic, it's really hard to say because
yeah, it's
people
true.
just like, I mean, well, so you're, in law, right?
Mhm.
Like, think about settlements and stuff, like,
Yeah.
right? Like, it may seem like, oh, hey, we got it, we did this, or we did X,
Yep.
or, but it's like, wait a second, which party really won? Which party
Yeah.
really lost?
Yep.
Unless you know the sort of the real details of that, you're not
Yeah.
gonna, you might not
Yeah.
know that answer.
My alternative dispute resolution professor, ADR, mediation, arbitration, things like that, and negotiation. I took as many of her classes as I could, and I'll think of her name in a minute. Maybe put it in post. But um, she talked about several cases where, let's say, an injured plaintiff, and I was near Detroit. I was in Michigan, at Michigan State, to study law, and she talked about automotive cases where somebody would get an injury and they would sue the company and they would hold out for a multi-million dollar settlement, and it would take 10 years for the case to settle, and then by that time the plaintiff, sometimes they would pass away,
Yeah.
but along the line the company had offered to settle with them several times. And so, yeah, maybe you won 10 years down the road, but now you're dead. And so
So, yeah.
you're not going
Right.
to collect.
Right.
Or um, there was a movie, Class Action, with John
Oh, yeah.
Travolta.
Right. Right.
And yeah, you can sue a company into oblivion to the point where they go bankrupt.
Right.
Right. And now what have you won?
Right.
So,
Right.
so
Right.
what? Right. So, yeah, that's my experience in law.
No, no, I think it, and I'm just saying we often just see, just a sliver, right? It's just a
Mhm.
small sliver of what's going on. So, I get like the
Mm.
news headlines and stuff. I mean so like the CNN Plus thing. Although I mean, I have no doubt that was a failure, but I just think that so I'm not arguing otherwise on
Yeah.
that point. But I sometimes I wonder, like, do I really know what's happening here?
No,
And
well, we don't. I
yeah,
mean,
right.
it's kind of like when you see a couple, and I remember growing up, one of our neighbors got divorced, and everybody said, "But they're so happy," and but you don't know what's happening over the dinner table. Like,
Right, 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 right. So that like 1 hour at the party, they were all
oh,
smiles,
they're
and then,
smiling and holding hands, and
well, just like this podcast, we're
yeah,
all friends.
we're pretending to like each other.
We're all friendly here, but
Yeah,
once
yeah,
it goes off, it's
and nobody has to know that we're naked.
right.
So
That's true. I'm surprised
is
you're
that
not more
uncomfortable?
embarrassed.
Is
No,
that
no, no. For
uncomfortable?
me,
Okay,
it's
yeah,
totally
I'm fine. I
comfortable.
mean, it's really warm outside, so
Sure, sure, sure.
no problem. So switching switching it, I kind of have a feeling I already know about this because you don't seem like a person to take shortcuts, but um are there any, like, not life hacks, but like, are there any hacks? Are there any, I'm not saying shortcuts, are there any hacks?
Hacks. Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, I guess I think I understand, like, um hacks. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like reading books is like a hack
Okay.
to life, because it's like if you seriously read books, a lot of books,
Mhm.
and you read widely and you read the right ones,
Mhm.
um you can gain so much insight. It's, you'll never like learn it all through books, but I mean, you
Mhm.
sort of can augment your understanding of the world and everything through, these books. And if you like reading, especially you read the right guys, it's like you're compressing lifetime of
Yeah.
wisdom in a few dozens of hours, or
Mhm.
and it's like that's like a hack. I mean, if you want to hack, like,
Ah.
that's a hack, I think. But there's you gotta make use of it, right?
Mm.
The other hack, yeah, like I don't know, I've never been like, like, wake up at 4 a.m. and then take a cold shower and then like clip my right side of my toenails but not my left, and it's like, I've never really been like that kind of
Okay.
guy. Maybe I'm
What
just too not disciplined and lazy, but
what time do
yeah.
you wake up?
Well, that's not a fair question
Okay.
because no, 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 because like today I woke up at like 9:30. Okay,
Okay.
so um, and I think I came into the factory at like 11 or something,
Okay.
somewhere around there, and people are like listening, like, oh, that what a loser. But in my defense, I was on calls at like 1 a.m. and so it's like no, I don't want to say that. I just mean like I never define it like that. I think you should really define what you do not by or by your the results, your sort of your output. Time ticks the same for everybody, right? Every day. So it's really, you got to really seriously think about like what's going to work for you and what's your current situation. And I know for me the most important thing is to be on some of these calls late. So I need to but I also know that I need to sleep. I'm not going to be useful to anyone during the day if I'm running on 2 hours or whatever.
That's a thing I've focused on a lot recently, because somebody told me, every successful person I know wakes up at 4 a.m. I'm like, really?
I'm a little bit doubtful of those stories, to be honest.
Me too. But, and the thing is for me, so I work a lot with, international clients, and sometimes I'll be up till 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
The sun is already up, and then I'm like, okay, I need a couple hours before my 10 o'clock meeting.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is a hard and fast rule to that. I focus more on what did I get done in the hours I was awake.
Oh yeah, I think productivity is a major one, and I think you gotta, if you take your life seriously like that, you'll end up finding that like you can accomplish a lot. I don't have any like hacks like that. Like, life is not a series of tasks, right? Like, I think that's the big thing. It's actually not about getting tasks done. It's really like, I'm driving towards this vision, but some things are not that important. And there's a tendency to get yourself busy doing tasks that, by the way, I make this mistake, too. So I'm sounds like I'm saying this like I'm like really zen and I do like, I sniper shot like one thing a day, and then but I actually do a lot of tasks, right? I think I was late to the podcast because I was like doing one of my to-dos, right? Yeah,
not a big deal.
So, but I think it's more like you realize that, or the danger is that you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to fill up my day with all these things. But the reality is that one thing can outweigh another by 10 to 1 or 100 to 1. And it's sort of the thing that maybe you don't want to do. Maybe it's actually something that's the most difficult thing on your list. And you're like, well, I've got 8 other things to do today on my list. So, I'm going to, if I do those, I'm going to say, hey, this other one can wait. And I've definitely made this mistake before. And it's like, no, that this one is the most important. If you knock this one out, and you don't do any of the others, then you're still going to be way ahead. So don't give yourself the excuse that you're busy, right? Like that's not a good reason for like anything. Like, yeah.
So it's kind of like the old story, put the rocks in first, right? And
what's that?
So there's a story of the teacher or the mentor, or whatever, who is filling up a jar, right? And they got sand and pebbles and rocks. And they put all the sand in, and they put the pebbles on top of the sand. And then they try to put the rocks in, and the rocks don't fit. So they pour everything out again.
Okay.
Never mind the mess. Like, we'll figure that out later. But they put the big rocks in first.
Sure.
And then they pour the pebbles around it. And then they pour the sand in.
Sure.
And they say, now you can fit everything in the day. But what they've done is they put the rock rock being the most important thing.
Yeah, the part of the logic part of me is like screaming, but yeah, that's the
See, I'm more like the creative, I write music, I do podcasts. You're more and this is one reason I enjoy hanging out with you, like when we go out, in a group, is that your thinking and my thinking are like pretty different. But I always get value out of hanging out with you. That's why I wanted to have you on my podcast.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I
wish it felt like that for me too. And then
you're probably like, when is he going to go home?
No, I had to. No. I'm just it's same for me though. I like, and by the way, the different ways to solve problems and perspectives, super critical. I think if you want to be, really, you want other people than you in the room that are looking at the problem and are like going to make, because you're going to miss something. Your own biases come into play, and it's great to have a team and different perspectives on it. So I actually find a lot of value in just like bouncing ideas off of people and and figuring out like how they see the world. And but yeah, the Pebble thing is, I think it's true. I think you tackle hard stuff like if you tackle hard stuff, like the other stuff just is almost trivial at some point. And then but then when you do all this trivial stuff, you're like, oh man, I'm already tired. You kind of make an excuse to like not do the hard stuff.
I mean, you could do email all day long and get nothing done. And, I mean, unless that's your email marketing or SEO, whatever.
Right.
And for me, I find the thing, this is just maybe just me, but the thing that I don't want to do or the thing that scares me the most sometimes tends to be the most important thing. The thing I dread doing, like working out or that phone call or that report or whatever that's.
Right. Yeah, no, I think, and you know, fear is really something, or maybe not, fear or like, how do I say, like, going away from pain, shying away from pain is not something you want to do as an entrepreneur. I think an entrepreneur, you almost want to embrace pain. It's really difficult, but if you can sit there and like embrace pain, you'll really quickly discover that you start solving problems that that other people can't do, which makes you valuable. It's kind of like, you know, most people don't want to confront these issues, but if you confront them and you get them over with and whatever, then you're sort of, the other stuff is becomes almost trivially easy, and you find yourself in a really good position. I think pain is required to grow as a human in general, and so
I have to agree, and that's a perfect note to end this on. If I know you're not a social media influencer, but if people want to find out more about your company,
that's a good question. You could go to our website, or send me an email. Just send me an email, and then
I'll put that in the show notes then.
Sure. Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you, Alex. It's been a good time, and I always appreciate talking to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.